Hugh's journey began in the beautiful landscapes of Zimbabwe, where his love for the wild was nurtured from a young age. A graduate of the University of Cape Town, Hugh excelled academically and carved a path through diverse leadership roles across the globe. From the United States to Canada and Europe, he has been at the helm of various companies, steering them with a focus on leadership development and executive coaching. His profound connection to Africa makes Hugh a good speaker and an interesting friend. In 2015, Hugh founded Tasimba, a unique safari experience that goes beyond the ordinary. Tasimba is much more than a travel experience. It's a deep dive into the heart of the wilderness, offering insights into the wisdom of nature and the importance of conservation. Hugh will help us understand the Keystone Conundrum, a story of unintended consequences. His talk will explore the pivotal role of elephants in the African ecosystem as a keystone species, the contrasting fortunes of their populations, and the complex challenges and opportunities that conservation efforts face. So please join me in welcoming a true keystone individual who inspires us to think globally and act locally.
Thank you,
reminding
Carl.
us reminding us that we all have a role to play in the stewardship of our magnificent planet. Now take it away, Hugh.
Thank you, Carl. And good morning again, everyone. It's great to be here, as it is every Wednesday that I can make it, but especially great to be here and have the opportunity to spend a little time with you and talking about Africa. Today's talk is going to be really on two themes. One has to do with elephants, and the other has to do with humans, and they are inextricably linked. So you'll see how the linkage works out as we go along. First, I have a question for you, though. My question is this. Who could tell me, and put it on the chat box, why is Philadelphia called the Keystone State? Anybody know? Deathly silence so far. Well, all right, I'll tell you. I know you're dying to know. Because of the 13 original colonies that formed the United States, Pennsylvania was sort of the middle one geographically, and it also was the only one that did not have an Atlantic seaboard. And so Pennsylvania became the linchpin and, of course, was the location of the first capital of our country. Let me remind you, because we talked about this before, but what the keystone really is. The keystone is the stone that is the wedge-shaped stone in the top of an archway. And because it's wedge-shaped, it creates pressure on all of the other stones in the archway. And that's what holds the archway up. So the keystone is there, and it's called the keystone because it does exactly that. It supports everything around it, which is why when we talk about the Keystone Conundrum, we're talking about elephants who are the keystone species of Africa. So I'm going to share my screen if I can. There you go. Is that working for you, Tony? Good. Okay. Let me get rid of it. So the Keystone Conundrum. First, let's talk about what are the keystone species. And the best keystone species I can think of is anyone which would fit this description. Those whose existence creates a beneficial outcome for others in their ecosystem, an impact that would radically change if the keystone species were not there. So think of the most obvious, everywhere you find them, the most obvious keystone species on Earth, bees. Imagine what life would be like, what food, flowers, vegetables, everything would be like if the bees weren't doing their job every single day. They are creating a beneficial outcome for others by the pollination that they do. I know, I'm sure somebody's saying, well, I guess, we're the apex species, so we're probably a keystone species, right? No, we are not one. Do you know that there's not one single other species that would miss us if we weren't here? Not one. No other species in nature is dependent for a beneficial outcome on us. Okay, you can say, well, what about my dog? Your dog would soon become feral. And don't worry about your cat, it already is. So we're talking about species which do create a beneficial outcome for others. And Africa's keystone is this guy. I mean, the elephant is Africa's keystone individual in every way because of so many reasons. Let me give you some of those reasons. African elephants create the pathways to water, and they need a lot of water, about 40 gallons a day. Every elephant needs to drink. They're fairly big, as you can imagine. So when they go through the bush, whether it's the tall grasses or whether it's the forest or whether it's the dense bush, they create a pathway. And in doing so, they're creating the game trails for other animals to follow and to go and find the water. So the pathways to water that the elephants create, in fact, often then become the trails that we, as when we're on safari, on the vehicles, follow, as well as the animals that are going to the waterhole. Elephants also do something interesting. They dig for minerals. They'll find a place, generally clay type soils, and they, with their trunks and their feet, they will start to dig and get minerals because they know they need some of the minerals that they're not getting from their vegetarian diet. And in doing so, they'll create a depression 2 or 3 feet deep and where they're digging the minerals. And other animals, of course, will come along as well and enjoy a salt lick or enjoy some of the minerals. So they get that benefit. So they dig for the minerals, but then when the rainy season comes, what happens? Well, that depression fills with water. So in effect, what then happens is people, elephants and others start drinking from it. And because elephants are elephants, they love the water, but they also love to roll around in the water and in the mud after the water hole starts to dry out. So by doing so, they're creating new water holes. And the elephants are the ones who started them.
Hmm.
Elephant dung, glorious dung. Let's talk about elephant dung. Why? Because elephants have an incredibly inefficient digestive system. About 70% of the nutritional value of what they take in every day, and they eat about 150 kilograms of food a day, with 300 pounds of food a day. But they have this inefficient digestive system. So 70% of the nutritional value goes right out the back door. What does that mean? Well, it means that everything that they consume, when they are dropping these great big round balls of manure called the bolus, it's full of nutritional stuff for other animals. And elephants, by the way, they love to eat seeds and seed pods, but they don't bother to chew the individual seeds. They just mow it all down. So those seeds then spend 16 or 20 hours inside this nice big warm moist oven and come out the back germinated and already in a ball of manure. And so what the result of that is, that seed can plant a tree or a shrub or whatever it was that the elephant ate. So in some places, for example, you'll find palm trees which shouldn't be there, but that very likely they came from an area where they did have palm trees. The elephants ate the seeds, and gradually those seeds worked their way down the line, and they exist in parts of Africa that they don't normally grow in. But at the same time, other animals all then go into the dung and they search out, some of them for the seeds, some of them for other stuff. So hornbills will go into there, baboons, monkeys, all sorts of insects, butterflies, all of them will get benefit from that rich, nutritious elephant dung. One of the reasons that elephants are called Africa's gardener is because they are planting these trees with the seeds that they dump out the back. But another thing they do is they prune the treetops of certain trees, like particularly a tree called the terminalia. And that tree normally would grow a full trunk, and then the branches and the foliage would be high up, out of reach of everything but a giraffe, which don't eat terminalia anyway. But what the elephants do is they like that top growth, and so they prune and eat that. And that means what the tree then does, it responds by creating a lot of foliage all the way down the trunk. The trunk now isn't a smooth trunk for the foliage at the top. The tree has leaves and branches all the way down, which means that the other browsers, which are animals that eat leaves, as opposed to grazers who eat grass, browsers can come along and enjoy the browsing of those trees because the elephants pruned the top and the tree responded by growing its leaves further down. Another thing they do is they're like, again, Africa's gardener. They prevent forest encroachment on grasslands. In many cases, the seed I was talking about that planted a tree turns into a nice young sapling, and the elephant will find that on the edge of the forest, tear it up because it's a nice juicy sapling, and in doing so, they're preventing the forest from gradually encroaching on the grasslands. Who's that helping? All of the grazing animals that need as much grassland as you can get. The impala, the wildebeest, the zebras, the buffalo. So this is elephants' role in preserving and in being the keystone species. They really do have a huge impact. I want to talk and shift now to talking about elephant population. You've heard about how elephants have become and are an endangered species. And I want to take 2 years to show this decline. 1975, about 700,000 elephants in East and Southern Africa. East Africa being Kenya, Tanzania, Southern Africa being, for the sake of this talk, being Botswana and Zimbabwe. 700,000 in total. By 2023, that number is down to just over 300,000, and a loss of close to 400,000. Let's see where that happened. 80% of the elephants in 1975 were in East Africa. That's the orange bar. Less than 100,000 left. So East Africa lost from 550,000 to 80,000 animals in that 50 years. That is devastating. That's incredible destruction of elephants in two countries, primarily, Kenya and Tanzania. But look what happened in Southern Africa. A relatively small number, 150,000 or so, 50 years ago in 75, is now 250,000. So Botswana and Zimbabwe have been successful in growing their elephant populations, while the populations in East Africa have absolutely plummeted and been decimated. Catastrophic losses. And what are they caused by? Well, for the most part, humans. Let's start with poaching. Poaching became and was and is gradually been under control, but was a hugely profitable business, as big as like in narcotics. The cartels that were formed to bring ivory out of Africa and to distribute it in Asia primarily were very, very big and very powerful, and very they were not nice people. Let's put it that way. And the small end of that was the people who went into the bush and were killing elephants and hacking the tusks off, and then hauling the tusks off to a distributor who would take them to the coast, who would pack them up and ship them out of the country. That's where most of those elephants went. But that's not all. It wasn't all about poaching. There was another big human influence, and that is climate change. Longer droughts have been occurring in Africa over the years because of climate change. And longer droughts are actually very hard on elephants because they need so much water. And that if the water starts to dry up in the long dry season, and the water holes and the natural water holes and even the pumped ones start to decline, elephants have to walk further and further to get to water. And the saddest part is that they'll walk sometimes 20 miles a day or more to find water. And the youngest ones, the calves and the juveniles, are the ones who have a hard time with that. They don't have the strength of the resilience to be able to do some of that walking, and the very old ones as well. And so what you'll find, and it's the saddest sight, is to see elephant carcasses right by the waterhole. They made it to the waterhole, but the drought has been so hard and they had so little resource left that they died when they got to the waterhole. Another part of the human impact here is that East and Southern Africa has been the fastest growing population annually in the world, about 2.5% per year. So that takes you from 1960, where there were 90 million people in East and Southern Africa, to 580 million now, 6 times increase. When human population increases like that, what's going to happen? Well, a lot of that means that they require more land. Land that had been wildlife, had been wasn't in agriculture, wasn't under ranching or anything. Land that had been vacant. They start resettling on that, reducing and shrinking the habitat that's available for wildlife. And when you start to shrink the habitat, you start to actually create a stress on the herds, all of them, not just elephants, but all of them. There's less food available in a more compressed space. And so you start to have a population decline of a lot of animals for that. And that inevitably leads to one of Africa's biggest challenges, which is what we call the human animal conflict. And it's anywhere that wildlife comes into contact with human life. And so as the population has spread, you've seen more and more of that type of interaction where humans and animals now are in some sort of conflict, where the animals, lions or other predators, come and eat livestock from the villages, and elephants in particular will come in and destroy and eat the crops. So there's been a war going on. And sad to say, from the point of view of the animals, in that war, there's only ever one winner, and and that's humans. The animals always get to suffer from that. But all is not lost, because I told you about the Southern African growth in things. So let's talk about the success. And I'm going to talk mostly about Zimbabwe, because that's the country that I know best, having grown up there, and that's where we take all of our safaris. Zimbabwe is part of that success in Botswana and Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe has had a really great program of tight management of the national parks. They've been very well protected and very well patrolled to ensure that a minimum of poaching happens from those national parks. They've done a really great job over the years. At the same time, within those parks, they then have concessionaires, people who will take over control of a part of the park under a 25-year lease. And that would be ecotourism companies like Wilderness Destinations, who we use, who take over. And the wilderness area that we go to is about 220 square miles. And it's under the conservation of everything in that is the responsibility of that ecotourism company. That's everything from the habitat to the wildlife to the tracks, to ensuring that the wilderness is left in as pristine a condition as possible. Outside of the parks, there's another thing which has been going on, which is equally effective. And that is those communities that have been threatened, as I was telling you earlier, by the spread of human existence, and the villages that have been threatened by that. Now, they've had a program there where those villages are helped to insulate and to protect themselves from the wildlife coming in and taking their crops or killing their livestock. And it's a program in which the villages then get a benefit from doing that, and get added financial support or related collateral support. And it's a program called Campfire, which is the communal area management program for indigenous resources. But it's a really effective program, and it has reduced the human-animal conflict. And at the same time, there's been active and really effective anti-poaching units operating in and around all of the national parks. But there's one big thing that has made that success, and that is pumped water holes. So let me talk briefly about pumped water holes. Hwange National Park is the biggest national park in Zimbabwe. It's about 5,500 square miles, but it was formed about 100 years ago. But there was no year-round surface water there. There's no main rivers that flow all year. There's no lakes. There's no other year-round surface. But there is an abundant aquifer, because a lot of the park used to be dried up riverbeds. And so there's an aquifer which supports and underneath the park. So when they formed the park, they started drilling wells. And there are now 50 or more pumped water holes in Hwange. What does that do? Water holes create, and the habitat around them create and attract wildlife. Elephants didn't used to be able to stay there year round. Now, because it's pumped water holes, the elephants are there. And because there are elephants there and all the other animals, it's teeming with wildlife now after 100 years, that national park. There's tourism, there's safari camps. Tourism brings in revenue, and revenue is what pays for conservation. So you've got a virtuous circle there of the wildlife bringing in the tourism, which brings in the revenue, which pays for the conservation. And the side benefit of having safari camps in the parks is that all those very poverty-stricken rural areas, which were essentially subsistence economy, have no no major economy other than what they eat, what they grow is basically the way it is. But the safari camps employ people from those villages. for the wait staff, for the chefs, for the kitchens, for the housekeepers, for the laundry, for the safari guides. All of those people, many of them come from the villages. So they are bringing money back into those villages. And those villages then start to prosper. And when you sit at the camp and you see this this was on a hot October day. It was hazy day, so it's no bright sun on it, but the temperature was in the 90s, and the elephants come to that waterhole right in front of camp, and you can tell see how shallow it is. But what's amazing, we sat there one day and watched about 200 or 300 come to that waterhole, not all at once. It's as if they've got a gatekeeper because they come family by family. They'll come to the waterhole, they'll drink, and then they'll move on. It's the most considerate and thoughtful thing. It's as if the elephants know we're not the only family who needs water here, and they don't stick around and stay at that waterhole, but they do enjoy it when they're there. Now let's talk about the unintended consequences. The question is, how many is too many? We're talking about elephants. Every habitat has what's called a carrying capacity, and that is where the naturalists and the botanists and the wildlife experts and everything look at and study the natural habitat, the food sources for wildlife. And wildlife meet at different levels of food. I mean, you've got the grazers I talked about in the grasslands, you've got the browsers, and you've got elephants and giraffe. So while a certain habitat can support a lot of different animals, the carrying capacity they calculated at Wangi National Park was for 14,000 elephants. That was about 10 years ago. 14,000 elephants was what they thought the park could carry. It now has 45,000. That is amazing when you're there and watching and looking at them, because there are hundreds of elephants literally a day that you see, but it's a problem. The consequences are that you're going to get habitat degradation. Because if you've got water holes, the elephants will want to come, particularly when it's really hot towards the end of the dry season. They'll want to come to the water holes 2 or 3 times a day. So it means they won't go very far to find food. So they're stressing in a radius around each water hole. They're stressing the habitat and reducing the amount of habitat. Degradation being that if habitat doesn't have the capacity to recover in the wet season, in the rainy season, the growing season, then it's actually being degraded year by year because it's able to support less and less wildlife and less elephants. The other part about it is that stressed habitat, that is habitat that suffers from overconsumption, is more vulnerable when there are droughts. And as I said before, there are longer droughts. And so the habitat becomes destroyed from natural causes as well as from the elephants doing it. Well, when you get this kind of situation, it doesn't happen as much, but it is growing, that the elephants are ranging into the rural villages in search of food. So you've created a situation in which you've got these unintended consequences, too many elephants. And so here's going to be where the conundrum comes in. Oh, let me just give you a quote from Chief Seattle. Humankind did not weave the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. And that is absolutely true of nature. When you go and spend time in the bush, you realize everything is somehow interconnected. And so when you change one bit of it, something else suffers. Remember the butterfly theory. So the conundrum, and I'm going to put 5 options out here, and I'm going to tell you none of them are good options. But I'll ask you to put in the chat box which one of them you think is probably the best one that you go with. Let's start. First one, if you've got too many elephants, well, translocation, move them. Elephants have been moved before, maybe not thousands at a time or 10,000s at a time, like the problem would be in Wangi, but they can be moved. About $10,000 per elephant to move it, by the way. So there's a money problem right away. But secondly, we're going to move them. Where's the open habitat that can support a big influx of elephant population? Where's the vacant land? Anywhere. So translocation is a great idea, but the options of where to go with them are very, very poor. Next, culling. Used to be done a lot. Culling is when they would go out and they would isolate a complete family, the matriarch, her sisters, her daughters, her granddaughters, and their juveniles and calves. So an entire breeding herd, all the females, and they would wipe out the whole herd. Why would they wipe out the whole family? Because that way you have less elephants who are grieving the loss of family. They found that if you took out random elephants, you created a lot of grieving and a lot of stress on the elephants, and therefore you actually created some adverse behavioral issues where the elephants became skittish or else became very aggressive. Who can blame them? But culling in today's world, are you kidding me? I mean, how long would that last before there was such an outcry that it would be? You wouldn't do it. You couldn't do it. It can't happen. Oh, here's a good one. Sterilization. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's sterilize the elephants so they can't breed as much. I don't think when they add the word contraceptives, they mean actually fitting bull elephants with a condom. But my point being, sterilization and the introduction of drugs into elephants to try to prevent them from breeding. We've got over dependent amongst humans and drugs. We're now going to create a dependency on elephants. I don't think that's a very good choice. All right, here's what some of them will say. And I have heard people in the wildlife industry say this. People in World Wildlife have said that to me. Shut down some of the water holes. Well, if you shut down some of them, all you're going to do is move the pressure onto the others. So you're going to make the situation around the remaining water holes even less supportive of wildlife. So then, all right, we'll shut them all down. In other words, okay, destroy the entire habitat that all those animals depend on. I'll tell you, the elephants will walk 200 miles. Some of them will go 200 miles to the west, to the Chobe River system in Botswana, and others of them will go the 200 miles north to the Zambezi system. So the elephants will find a way, and many of them will survive and create added elephant pressure on those areas which are already overpopulated. What about the rest of the animals if you shut down all the water holes? All of the other animals that come to drink, the antelope, the zebra, the buffalo, every other animal that's there is coming to drink at the water hole. Where are they going to go? They don't migrate like elephants. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the strength. They don't have the opportunity to go several hundred miles in search of water. So you have a massive die-off. That's a solution? I don't know. Finally, do nothing. This is nature's problem. Let nature sort it out. So very quickly, in the chat box, pick a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. What would you do? No real option. You're right, Tony. Janelle would do 3, sterilization. Yeah. 5, do nothing. 5. Yeah, it really is. I mean, the reason I just wanted you to think about what you would do is because it is a very intractable problem. It's a very difficult one. Here's why elephants matter. Because they are the iconic animal of Africa. I mean, they really are. Elephants mean Africa. I know there's Asian elephants, but still, when you see a picture of an elephant, people think of Africa. They are intelligent, gentle giants. They are extraordinary and amazing to watch and sit quietly and watch them interacting. They are role models of family and social behaviors. As someone said when we were doing the introductions earlier, it's amazing how the matriarch and the senior females will keep the younger ones from getting out of line. And they really will. If you see one of the younger ones getting rambunctious to the water hole, you'll soon see an older one go over and just give them a good bump. And that younger elephant will start to behave again. They're compassionate, they're emotional, and they're bonded with each other, and they grieve the loss of loved ones. I myself have seen that grieving. What they call a bachelor herd, which is the young elephants which are kicked out of the families because they don't stay in the female breeding herd after their age of 15 or so. They go out and they're in bachelor herds until they're big enough and strong enough to be able to earn the breeding rights. And one of them died. And the saddest thing was for the next couple of days to see one of his friends standing vigil by what was left of his carcass. Just standing there and honoring his friend. I mean, they really feel that. and they are Africa's keystone species. And when you move the keystone, you change the consequences all through the habitat. They matter because everything in nature is connected, as Chief Seattle says. If we fail to protect the keystone, we're failing to protect nature itself. And we are a part of that nature. So we're failing to protect the nature that is part of our planet, as part of our lives. Look, here's a picture which we took a couple of trips ago. These two elephants came from different parts of one came in from the left-hand side, as you can see, the other from the right-hand side. They're not in the same family right now. But the one on the left is a female, and she's quite a bit larger, you can tell from the tusks, and she stands higher than the one on the right. The one on the right is a male. And my guess is that this is her son, and he's been kicked out of the herd, but came back and happens to see her at the waterhole. Because when they do that thing where his trunk is actually inside her mouth, that is one of the most intimate greetings that elephants have with each other. And that's an old love connection between two elephants. And you sit and watch that, and your heart beats a different way for them. So there's tough lessons we learn from all of this. First, human improvements, quote, air quotes, to nature can easily have unforeseen outcomes. In fact, if you think about the number of times we intervene in nature and how many of them turn out really well for nature, there's not many. Nature is so interconnected that it's not up to us to try to manipulate it. And as soon as we do, we somehow manage to screw it up because we change some other outcomes. And when we do try and manipulate it, it's really called man playing God. The third thought is true conservation is about preserving wild places for the wild inhabitants, not for human benefit. And that's important because sometimes you see conservation being done purely to try to create a more commercial environment for humans. The big one, we need to focus and to have an understanding of how important it is to save the elephants in the success regions, Southern Africa, as much as in the failed regions. All of the focus on save the elephants has been in Kenya and Tanzania for good reason. They presided over the absolute decimation of their elephant population. But we need to figure out how to deal with where you've got the overpopulation in the southern Africa. There are people who will say, well, it's not up to us. I mean, we're here and they're there. And I want to tell you, yes, it is up to us. Because nothing happens until someone cares. And if we don't care, who will? Because it's our planet too. We're equally responsible for trying to preserve and conserve our planet. And a truth about the developing world is when the focus of global attention gets onto a place or a situation in Africa or anywhere in the world, that's when it gets results. Why? Because dollars and activity and support tend to follow the global attention. And therefore, there is solutions that can be put in place to do that. So each of us has it within us to make a difference, not just about this situation, but about any situation where nature is being threatened or nature is out of balance. We have it within us to make a difference. I want to give you a quote from a wonderful, amazing woman who every year she comes to San Francisco with the Wildlife Conservation Network. Jane Goodall. She's the chimpanzee conservationist. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference. And you have to decide what difference you want to make. So let me talk for a minute then about that impact. Because it literally, if you think about it, the impact that we're talking about is what's your footprint on Earth? And when we say keystone impact, what we're really meaning is how you come across to others. That's the impact you're making. How others see you, what you do, what you say, how you treat others, who you genuinely are, what people remember about you when you're not there or even when you're gone. That's your impact. That's the impact that each of us is making. And Jane Goodall says it right. Whether you think you're just a small, tiny little cog in the whole system, everyone is making an impact of some sort or another. And keystone impact is what we do and what we can do. Even though we're not a keystone species, what we can do to create beneficial outcomes for others in our own ecosystems. So here's where I'm bringing Keystone now into our situation. We can become Keystone individuals. Well, what defines a Keystone individual? Who are they? What sort of things are they doing? And I'm going to give you some examples. This is by no means the comprehensive list. Check each of those boxes and then you're a Keystone individual. They're examples of what makes in any one of us a Keystone individual. Think of those you know who make a difference by creating a beneficial outcome for others. People maybe in your family, your community, your workplace, society. I would urge you, take a look around this screen, take a look around the people who are on this call right now, and think about some of what you know about those people. Many of the people on this call are Keystone individuals because of what they do in creating a beneficial outcome for others. They are people who bring joy into the life of someone else or reach out with kindness to others who they barely even know, or they commit to worthwhile projects at home and abroad, or they plant trees they will never sit under. That's using an old adage. That I'm not necessarily saying they do plant the trees. I'm simply saying they create something which actually will never benefit them because it will be beneficial long after they're gone. So that's a figurative thing. But if they do plant trees they'll never sit under, that's good too. Provide support, guidance, or mentorship for those in need. And this one, which is perhaps even more important to all of us as Keystone individuals right now in our country, show resilience and leadership in times of chaos and despair. So I'll leave you with one question. How can you be a Keystone individual? Thank you for having me. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
All right, let's open it up to the group here. Any questions for Hugh?
Carl.
Yeah, Hugh, I first became aware of how important elephants are and how uh, remarkably emotional, and they seem to have almost be able to communicate mentally amongst each other. And it turns out with the right humans as well. And I read the book, the Elephant Whisperer. You're probably familiar with that, which is an almost impossibly beautiful story. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Is that book accurate? I mean, do
Yeah.
you see that kind of behavior?
Yes, absolutely, it's accurate. And there are times when you'll see it in force. Remember, I said in the talk how the elephants will come in and stay a little bit at the water hole and then move on. And you don't hear anything, but when the matriarch sends the signal, the whole family move on.
Mm.
But you didn't hear it, but it just they will be drinking and suddenly 10 or 12 or 15, however many in the family, they'll all stop and then all together move on. There's other times when you're out on the open grasslands and you'll see an elephant, and with the tip of it's just got the tip of its toe, one of its forward legs touching the ground. And what it's actually doing is listening to communications which are coming from as far away through the ground as 15 or 20 miles. And so they are able to communicate by the rumble that they can create that goes down through their legs and is carried through the subsurface of the soil and it can be picked up by elephants further away. So the behaviors and the way they communicate is very real and is very, and so that book is right. And yes, they are extraordinary in their ability to do that, Carl.
Excellent.
Yes.
Antonio.
Thank you so much. Amazing presentation. Oh my gosh, Hugh, what a beautiful presentation you made. So wonderfully done. What is being done of those five choices, those five options here? Can you share with us here what is the common thoughts of what's actually being of those choices? What are the ones that are most common today or the leading thoughts?
That's part of the problem. None. They're all being thought about, talked about, and walked away from. I mean, in a very small way, both Namibia and Zimbabwe did a small culling operation during this last drought. But it was 200 elephants. I mean, that's still a lot of elephants. But, you know, the concern was that they would then say, well, because we're having a drought, we need to feed people in the rural areas who don't have food. So if we kill a few elephants, that we can get some food to them. The problem with that is that gets to be one of those slippery slopes. When you turn that tap on, how do you ever turn that tap off? Because you'll create a dependency on the rural people for elephant meat to support them. So unfortunately, it is really not being. There's none of those are being actively pursued. They're all being studied and they're all being looked at by different agencies and different groups. They're being looked at that way, Antonio, but none of them are that I know of are being really. They may be testing some of them, for example, the sterilization, but I don't know of any of the others. For example, shutting down the water holes or any of that sort. I don't know of that happening. So it is the reason I put it out there, saying it's a conundrum, because I don't think we've got a solution for it. And as one good friend of mine, who is 40 years senior guide, one of the top guides in Africa, he said to me, "Hugh, it's not our problem. They'll sort it out." He said, "They'll figure a way. Elephants always do." And I'm saying, yeah, but they wouldn't be there in the numbers that they're if we didn't put the water holes there. So we created a situation, and now we're saying, okay, elephants, you figure it out. It's a difficult one. And what a good question. Thank you. I wish I could give you some belief or some hope that there's a good answer in there somewhere.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you.
Gordon?
Oh, wow. What a program. Thank you very much. 2 points I'd like you to respond to. First, you gave us the 4 things to choose from. My engineering mind says, no, you do all 4. You be intelligent about it. You don't just pick one. The second point, however, is when you talk about keystone individuals, the thought that came to my mind is that keystone individuals are selfless, and the opposite are selfish. In the Tao, there's a verse 17 that ends in one translation with, "When the great leader's work is done, the people say, we did this ourselves." And I think, so if you'd comment on those 2 points, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much, Hugh.
Gordon, that second point is to me is one of the fundamentals of leadership, and I do as Carl mentioned in the introduction, I do a lot of work in leadership, executive coaching and leadership development stuff, and that's almost one of the rubrics, one of the fundamentals of great leadership is when something has been accomplished, the people say we did it, and that is a leader who is enabling and who's providing and is creating and allowing others to create the successful outcome. So that's I definitely agree with you on that one. Remind me the first one again. Your first part. You're on mute.
The first one was the 4 points that you put up.
Oh,
I think a solution would be to be intelligent about doing some of all 4.
I think that may be eventually where it'll go, because I don't think any one of them is the solution, and I think that may be but ultimately that may be the way it goes. But as I said, I see evidence of those things being looked at and studied and so on, but I don't see evidence of any sort of real effective solution being implemented just yet. Thank you, Gordon. Susan.
Well, Hugh, you took me back into Kruger Park, and I'm the one that was told about the badly behaved youngers. They had to bring in a matriarch. And I had no idea that they were really Keystone, but you really made me look at who I know and what I see in a different way. Now, you talked about the Asian elephant, but the Asian elephants aren't the concern here. This is strictly the African elephant.
Well, yeah, primarily. I mean, there's a couple of things. Asian elephants actually have a more effective digestive system, and therefore that's why they've been able to put them to work. African elephants have to eat 16 or 18 hours a day, well, it's, so because of that, and because of that inefficient digestion, that's why they have to eat for so much of the day to get the required nutrition that they can. I don't know enough about the Asian elephants other than obviously that they have been brought into and are part of the agriculture. They're part of the transportation system. They're part of the plowing and moving stuff around. So they're heavy. They're wildlife tractors, if you will. But I don't know enough about the situation there. But I do know that that we're really talking the African elephant, which are bigger and which are less. Thank goodness we haven't figured a way of harnessing them or trying to employ them. There is, and there have been, and there are some places where, oh, you can take a ride on an elephant. And I had some guests come out into Africa from here, as a matter of fact. And it was her graduation gift, and we went to Victoria Falls, and she heard that you could ride an elephant back. And I thought, that's the last thing on earth I want to do. But I did it, and it was the worst 3 hours of my life. I hated every minute of it because I thought, this elephant was not trained to, this isn't what this elephant wants to be doing. This is just, it felt all completely wrong. And I'm pleased to see there's not much of that going on anymore.
Oh, so here's another question. How much are our government agencies involved in this effort? And will this slashing of funding foreign impact we're having as part of this global community?
I don't know how much of the US aid is going into wildlife and into wildlife protection. A lot of it obviously goes into rural population development and feeding programs and so on. Certainly in drought-ridden parts of Africa. The government involvement is not in Africa is not always entirely in service of the wildlife, because there's money to be made, and you can be pretty sure. I don't have any evidence of it, but it's a wild guess on my part that there were some people in East Africa who were making a lot of money by the fact that poaching went on and on and on. But I have no evidence on that. I'm just saying, how can there not have been that sort of corruption going on? So governments have not always been that effective. And here's the other thing. This is a fact of life in Africa. Elephants don't have a vote. Rural people do. And so governments are going to be in service of their rural population. And if wildlife suffers, so be it, because at least I got the votes.
That's a
bit
great
cynical.
line. No,
Huh?
oh, are you kidding? I'm from Chicago. That makes all the sense. But I love that line. Elephants don't have a vote. I'm writing that down.
Randall, you're on mute.
All right. Thank you. That's tremendous to learn about the intelligence and the emotions of elephants. I had a sprinkling of that, but certainly didn't know the depth. So many thoughts going through my mind here in agriculture. Some people say, oh, we need to go back to organic farming so that we're closer to nature. And the obvious question of that is, all right, which half of the world population do we want to eliminate? Because we're not going to be able to grow as much food organically as like we did 200 years ago. Everything was fine because we only had maybe 1 billion people instead of 9. So I think the serious point is that the human population is a key issue and a problem with elephants, just as it is in other areas as well. We used to have buffalo on the Great Plains. We pretty well eliminated them years ago. Just another, and this is kind of a frivolous comment, I agree. Here in Ohio and much of the eastern part of the country and actually across the US, for deer, I'll talk about deer for a moment, we have a hunting season, week or 2 weeks, and some of that is you can only shoot a doe, and other times bucks and does. So in that way, it's a controlled wildlife. And if the wildlife experts say, well, we got too many deer, then they might extend the hunting season or allow the individual hunter to kill more than one. If the deer population goes down low, then they restrict the hunting. I don't know how that would work with elephants, but that could be one of those options that's not very good.
It's
Thank
not a
you.
very good one. It is being applied actually more in Botswana. They have put out more a quota on more elephants that can be shot for trophies. And in the hunting regions of Zimbabwe, which are outside of the national park, and they are usually there's a buffer region and then there's a hunting area. Then elephants can be hunted there and are hunted there still. Now, I'm not a huge fan of hunting under any circumstances, but it is the conservationists, or at least I should say the hunters will tell you they are actually playing a really important role in conservation. I need to spend several days with them on an argument on that one because I'm not quite sure how that works, but that's where they're coming from in that. Thanks, Randall.
You get the same argument here about deer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you'll get the same argument here. And remember what happened in Yellowstone when they wiped the wolves out, how it changed the entire ecology of the park. And then they brought the wolves back in 95, and all of a sudden the park is back in balance. So in that context, the wolves are are a keystone species because they enabled other species to survive, and the place wasn't completely overrun with the deer. Bill Buchanan.
Good morning, Hugh. Remarkable presentation, especially for someone who has only had a vicarious experience with Africa. But as with some of our standout presenters on this in this club, sitting here, trying to ignite some of the 80 to 100 billion brain cells I have, and I got about 35 of them kicking along right now, and I'm thinking to myself, well, how do you become a keystone, species, if you want to call them that? And I'm thinking, well, here we are in beautiful southern Marin County, and we've been here since '75, and we've always been we're surrounded by open space and everything that comes with it. And so we have an organic garden, which Randall, I'm with you. We would never survive because it's such a boutique way to go at agriculture. But we have a lot of fun with it, and we grow some great tomatoes. But we try to be we go my bird dog and I go out in the open space every other day, and we encounter a species which has made itself known. It's called Canis latrans, the singing dog, coyotes. And we run into them occasionally. In 2020, almost 24 years ago, there was an upsurge of the population of coyotes in this area up on the hill. I'm looking at it right now out the window. And parents started getting a little nervous about their kids walking to school. Some dogs were attacked and so on and so forth. So we jumped into the fray. And we started contacting the agricultural commissioner and all people who were involved with wildlife in Marin County, including the police department. They said, we want no part of it. So anyway, Animal Services, Department of Agriculture came in because there were some coyotes who were, kind of aggressive. And we got to I published, I submitted some articles to the local press, and they published them, trying to come to an understanding because I began to understand. I met a lady called, she was with an outfit called Project Coyote. Her name is Camilla Fox. And she and I became friends. I took her up on the hill, showed her some of the characters up there. And so we came to the conclusion that you're not going to kill your way out of coyote population because it's so resilient. But, I'm sitting there thinking about what you're saying and what kind of effect you could have. Now, a couple of days ago, Journey and I were up on the hill, and he was looking down about 25 yards from where I was very intently. It was dusk, so I couldn't see what he was saying. It was his a beautiful, large coyote, almost the size of a German Shepherd. I call him Handsome Dude. We run into him once in a while. He was digging for his supper, a gopher. And I said to myself, you know what? What we've done by trying to educate people and do the best we can for coexistence is working. So anyway, that was a satisfaction. And then I'm thinking about, well, what else are you doing outside the radius of your neighborhood? And I was talking to Claire about this. I said, well, you know, we belong to, for instance, the Nature Conservancy and an outfit called the Mono Lake Committee, and some of these organizations that give you leverage, you know, to be effective in other areas. But anyway, that's where we are. We've been there since 70, well, even before that, you know, I'm a backpacker, a mountaineer, all that sort of thing. So I wanted to be there for a while yet. So I'm working my way, and thanks for your patience, to a question. And that is, even though I have a limited experience with Africa, I do know the fact that there was a seminal political upheaval, obviously, from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, with Mugabe coming on to the scene, you could arguably peaceful transition of power. Your presentation surprised the hell out of me, because it sounds like Zimbabwe is trying to do the best it can about the elephant problem, or if you want to call it that, or wildlife management. How can that be when they had so many problems with the human problem, human solutions to obviously some racial things and things like that. So what's the state of Zimbabwe politically in the governance area that is either beneficial or negative towards wildlife? I yield to you.
Very simply, Bill, if I could summarize it, the smartest and perhaps the only, but certainly the smartest thing that the Zimbabwean government has ever done has been to continue to provide an operating environment for the tourism, for the safari camps, and for wildlife, and for the national parks, because they realize that they are, and have been, particularly for the last 25 years, very, very short on foreign capital and forex coming in, and tourism brings in foreign dollars. So almost as if whatever goes on in the rest of the country is one thing. What happens in the Victoria Falls area and in the safari area, which is mostly gathered on the west side and then on the very north side of the country, that is being left to be almost a free enterprise zone for building and for creating and preserving and conserving wildlife. And thank God, so far, knock on wood, the government haven't tried to take it over in any way. They're letting the private operators do that. That's the best solution I can give you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Janelle.
Yes, in the United States, we have a real big problem with feral cats, the ones that are running wild. Every year, the shelters euthanize 1.5 million of them. And it sounds horrible, really, those cute little kitties, to do that to them and to the adults. But those cats are destroying the ecosystem by the amount of insects and birds, especially, that they eat. In some areas, it just wreaks terrible havoc. And so this problem with the elephant strikes me as just as a metaphor for a whole bunch of situations like this. And, can humans do anything about this? I really wonder if we can. We're unwilling to, in effect, abortion is a real big issue around the world. And I just don't know how we can cope with this if we don't control population in certain areas. And I saw those figures. The figures were very, very high. The birth rate, very high, where they're doing this great work with wild animals. It strikes me we really need some strong scientific thinking about this. Humans as emotional beings as we are, we're not going to do it.
Well, two thoughts crossed my mind, and Janelle, as you're talking. One is when we talked about the interconnectedness of everything in nature, it's so true. And what happens when you're talking about cats that then are euthanized? It's when we have domestic life, domestic animals that are then either going out and becoming feral or are getting into nature. Best example I can think of is the pythons and that in the Everglades. I mean, wild pythons from Africa living in the Everglades and are growing to huge lengths, much bigger than they are in Africa even, because they were released into the Everglades. And now I think there's a bounty even on them to try to control it, because that artificial introduction of a non-natural or non-indigenous species, excuse me, has created an imbalance in the nature.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
But if I could, while you're coughing there, the imbalance seems to me just a real force that has always been in nature. If we were to look back, we'd probably see these trends with all animals in all places.
Nature fixes itself. It
Well, it
balances
does
out.
something. I don't want to say fixes, but it does
Well,
something.
but if there's not enough food, then there are less animals there. They move off, or else there's a die-off. And so where you grow a healthy wildlife population, it's because nature is in balance. And if you've got a healthy population of the antelopes, you're going to have a healthy population of predators. If you're going to have healthy population of elephants, you've got a healthy population of the benefits that the keystone species produces. So this interconnection goes on whether we get engaged or not, and so that's why I think it's so important to understand the possible consequences of everything we do for all the right reasons, we think, and then you have consequences like that. I mean, I think it was probably right in the 1930s to create that national park and start drilling water holes, but the consequences are where they are.
Mhm.
Carl, I see your hand is up. Is it still up or it's a new question?
Yeah, it just real quickly. First of all, it seems to me nations like Zimbabwe who realize that the elephants bring people and the people bring foreign currency, and that makes them very happy. The elephants crave water, the governments crave money, right? Humans crave money. And if that money can also help the surrounding human populations, then they'll have skin in the game and it will be important to them. Now, my question is, what can we do here? What organizations, if there are any, do you recommend that we could contribute to, who are honest, who the money goes to the right place, all of that, that can help in the elephant conservancy?
My answer to that, Carl, is right here in San Francisco. There is what I consider to be one of the best wildlife conservation organizations globally. It's called Wildlife Conservation Network. And
Okay.
the difference between what they do and what others do is they find and check out the boots on the ground operations that are already in the conservation business in those different countries. And when they realize they've got that organization, that small organization, here's what they're doing, we'll provide them with funding to make them more effective. And so that Wildlife Conservation Network also has a thing called the Lion Recovery Fund. And that is because lions are even more endangered, vastly more endangered than elephants. There's less than 20,000 in the wild left in Africa. But they have that fund, which is trying to it's collaring more lions to try to understand where they are and how you can preserve the habitat and the environment for lions. They have an elephant recovery fund, the same thing, which is funding on the ground boots on the ground operations in Africa, which are conserving the wildlife. So it's what I prefer with that they're doing is that they're not saying we'll go in and fix it. They're saying we'll find people who are already there, who are committed to doing this conservation, and we'll provide them with funding.
Yeah.
And I think that is, to me, you say, what can we do? Check out Wildlife Conservation Network. I think they're just an outstanding organization, and they are based right here in the city.
Excellent. Thank you.
Welcome. Doug. You're on mute, Doug.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. Just a quick comment. And this presentation was phenomenal, and I had the great pleasure of sharing a trip with you. And I recall sitting under a tree with Ian McCallum speaking about the same things. And the thing that came to my mind as I sat there looking out, seeing elephants in the wild, and and so on, was humans have throughout history been tenants in the ecosystem or in the animal world. We've done very little to contribute to that ecosystem or to do anything positive, but yet have again and again created hurdles and challenges and things that have negatively impacted on the ecosystem, of which, as you said, left alone, the ecosystem would rectify a lot of those things. But unfortunately, now we're in a position of having to try and fix things that we already broke. And it seems like everything that happens contributes more to the problem than to the solution. So it really was an impression on me that we are not the keystone species on the planet. We are simply tenants and should treat the ecosystem with respect and reverence rather than try to find ways to fix it.
Yeah, I think it's a valid comment, Doug. I restrained myself from what my occasional comment is about humans and saying, no, we're not a keystone species. In fact, we're the reverse. We're a parasite on nature. But I restrain from saying that because it's quite aggressive talk, and inevitably involves a discussion with some in some sense or another. People get quite upset by the idea we're not a parasite. But you're right. We are, unless we are contributing something which is allowing nature to do its thing, then we are intervening. And if we're intervening, do we really know what the outcome of that intervention is going to be?
Thank you. And we're after 9 o'clock. I'm going to give 10 more minutes on the clock. And then Hugh, if you want to take any more questions. I know Mike Milstein's been waiting a long time, Carol Keeley, and I just saw Lauren Ward. So if you guys want to continue and do it quickly.
Thank you, Tony. I didn't know Mike's hand. Mike, I'm all ears, and you're on mute. You're still on mute, Mike.
Okay, Hugh. The number one solution was moving them. Other than the cost, what are the disadvantages of moving the elephants to other locations in Africa?
Well, you have to move them by some method other than persuading them to walk there. Because if you persuade them to walk there, they'll just walk right back. So you have to move them generally either by large trucks or by helicopter. And you literally what do you call it? Sedate the animal, and they put heavy ropes around its feet, and they lift it up upside down, and the elephant apparently don't die from that. They survive. They moved 500 or 600 of those at one point into a national park that had been wiped out because of in a civil war. So that's how you move them. But the bigger question is where is there adequate enough habitat to move them to?
Well, the locations that you mentioned that lost, heavy populations, why not move them into those areas?
Well, they have started. They have started doing that. The one is down in the national park called Gonarejo in the southeast of Zimbabwe, and they moved about 600 there, and that herd has now grown to I think about 11 or 1,200. There's another national park, which is a beautiful national park that I went to years and years ago in Mozambique, called Gorongosa, and that is being again a U.S. industrial or an investment banker is living out there and has been bringing elephants up from South Africa to populate that park. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and then it takes time for those herds to settle and to start breeding and to start creating the next generation of elephants that were born there.
Okay.
Next, who was next, Tony? You're on mute, sorry.
Carol Keeley, I believe, also I saw her hand up there for.
Okay. Carol?
Oh, you probably already answered this, but what are the populations presently and where do you see them growing or declining in the future?
Elephants, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they're recovering slowly in East Africa, and they've got, so they're, they were down below the 50,000 the mark. They're now 80,000, approaching 100,000. So they're growing slowly there. They're continuing to grow in Zimbabwe. I mean, Zimbabwe has added about 20,000 elephants in the last 5 or 8 years. So they're growing there, and they're growing in Botswana. Those South Africa is sort of has a good population, but is relatively steady, and it's not a big population of elephants anyway. But there are elephants, obviously. People on the call have seen them in Kruger Park in South Africa, and there's other places, a lot of places where there are elephants. So it's not an insignificant population, but it's not one of the major densely populated elephant areas in Africa.
What is the most densely populated animals in Africa?
Two places. One is the concession we go to in Zimbabwe, and the other one is in Botswana, because at the height of the end of the dry season, when the temperatures are going up into the 90s and hundreds, and there's still no sign of the annual rains, that's when the water holes are under the most pressure. But that's also when the elephants will gather round in those areas. And here's a little anecdote. Years ago, when Zimbabwe was in the early 2000s, Zimbabwe was going through a lot of economic problems. Most or many of the water holes in the park, which were in the government area, they didn't have the money for the fuel for the diesel pumps. So those water holes were running dry. Wilderness destinations who have the concession in the area we go to, they went on pumping. They had no tourists, they had no guests. The camps were there and open, but virtually nobody in them. They were making no money, but they went on pumping right through the economic bad times. And the elephants found them, and the elephants have remembered ever since. And even though there's lots of other water holes, there's still this in 5% area of the park at the peak of population. About 30% of the elephants in the park are in this concession, because they know that's where the water was, and we'll come back there because that's where we know to find it.
Nice, thank you.
I think Lauren West had his hand raised, or Ward. Sorry, Lauren Ward.
Lauren.
Hi, hope you can hear me, Hugh.
Yeah.
It's a simple question. What is our keystone species here?
There's a couple that I can think of, and I mean, we mentioned wolves in Yellowstone, but along the California coast, two species which are struggling, but they are keystone species, and that would be sea stars and sea otters, because the kelp forests in the coastal shallows, which are the nursery for the small species, for the young of many species, they're where they can hide away from the predators who will otherwise consume them. The kelp forests have been essential as the growing area and the nursery for next generations of sea wildlife. And there was a die-off in around 2015-16 in the kelp forests, and the consequence was that a lot of them didn't do very well, and the sea urchins, the purple sea urchins, start to take over the ocean floor. And when they take it over, the kelp forest can't regrow because it can't grow through that. There's now in places along the California coast what they call urchin barrens. It is the entire sea floor is just covered with purple sea urchins. And the sea stars at the same time had a major die-off as well. And it's possible that it was the same cause as the kelp, which had to do possibly with acidic water, possibly with that sudden temperature rise we had in the coastal waters in the mid-teens here in California. But whatever it was, the sea stars died, a lot of them. So there's not enough of them left to predate on the sea urchins. And so if the sea otters, there's just not enough of them. There's 3,000 of them, but at the same time, they do a great job in certain areas of keeping the sea urchins under control. Because as you know, they go down, fish them up, come down, they lie and put them on their, they float on the water and have a few of them on their chest, and they crack them open and eat them. But there's not enough sea otters. So that's a keystone species right here in California that I use as an example of one locally.
That's a surprising answer. I would have thought you said the honeybee.
Well, no, I said they were the first and most, but I started with that one. I said that's everywhere. That is the global keystone species.
The honeybee.
Sorry, I didn't. Yeah, absolutely.